by obedience, by painful honesty, by sacrifices that no one applauds, and by faithfulness to principles that feel hard in the moment but bring freedom in the long run. Your future is not found in the loud, dramatic moments of life. It's formed in the quiet, hidden spaces where you choose to be consistent when quitting would be easier. It's formed in the decisions to speak truth instead of flattery, to wake up early when comfort begs for sleep, to forgive when bitterness feels easier, to keep showing up when no one notices. If you want a strong future, you need to become a strong person. And strength is not given, it's forged in pain, in fire, in repetition, in surrender. The process cannot be skipped. You don't drift into greatness. You climb, and climbing takes everything. It requires you to leave behind the lies that keep you lazy. It requires you to take responsibility for where you are, even if it's not your fault. It requires you to embrace discomfort and walk forward with resolve even when the outcome isn't clear. And the beauty of it is this: you don't need to know every step. You just need to take the next one, today, now, because this moment is not empty, it is not meaningless, it is pregnant with purpose, with potential, with the possibility of a different future if you would only stop waiting and start moving. The future you hope for is not out of reach, it's just on the other side of your obedience today. Delaying action is the most dangerous form of self-sabotage. It hides behind polite phrases and socially acceptable excuses. It dresses itself in language that sounds wise: I'm just being cautious, I'm waiting for the right time, I'm still thinking about it. But underneath all of that is the raw truth: you are choosing not to move. You are convincing yourself that postponing effort, obedience, or decision will somehow protect you from failure, from embarrassment, from pain. But in reality, it is costing you the very things you claim to be preserving. Every delay plants seeds of doubt, fear, and passivity. It teaches your mind to second guess, your will to weaken, and your purpose to blur. What starts as a moment of hesitation slowly becomes a lifestyle of avoidance. There is a quiet kind of destruction in delay. It doesn't look dramatic at first. It doesn't make a loud entrance, but it kills with precision. It silences dreams. It suffocates courage. It robs clarity. Over time, you stop calling it delay and start calling it your personality. You build an identity around indecision. You start saying things like, I'm just not the kind of person who... when the truth is, you were the kind of person until you gave delay permission to decide your character for you. When you delay long enough, you start mistaking fear for wisdom and inaction for humility. You don't need to hear another message. You don't need another quote or podcast or opinion. You already know what you've been avoiding. You know the step. You know the conversation. You know the discipline you're supposed to pick up and the distraction you're supposed to lay down. But delay has become your security blanket. It gives you a false sense of control. You tell yourself that you'll act when you feel more ready, more equipped, more motivated. But readiness isn't coming like you think it is. Motivation won't knock on your door with fanfare. If you're waiting to feel strong before you act, you'll die waiting. Strength comes from obedience, not before it. Every time you delay what you know you're supposed to do, you train yourself to compromise. You reinforce a habit of disobedience. You create a rhythm of passivity. Eventually, your delay becomes so familiar that you no longer recognize it as the enemy. It becomes part of your daily routine. You convince yourself that this is just how life works. You tell yourself that it's okay, that you'll get to it eventually, that others are worse off. But deep down you know you're not living the way you were called to live. You know you've become too comfortable watching others take risks while you stay safely on the sidelines. You know that delay has cost you time, energy, momentum, and peace, and yet you keep waiting. You keep convincing yourself that more information will help, that you need another sign, that you need someone to push you, but no one is coming to force you. No one is going to carry you across the threshold. That's not how growth works. The most dangerous part about delay is that it masquerades as a neutral decision when it's actually a choice to move backward. Time doesn't wait for you to figure it out. Life doesn't pause while you make up your mind. Every delay costs you more than you think. It affects your relationships, your health, your confidence, your focus. It builds a gap between who you are and who you could be. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to bridge that gap. People often think that the danger of delay is missed opportunity, but it's deeper than that. The real danger is missed transformation. Because it's not just about what you're not getting, it's about who you're not becoming. Delay stunts your character. It keeps you spiritually and emotionally immature. It blinds you to the urgency of obedience. It numbs you to conviction. The more you delay, the more you lose sight of the person you were created to be. You start adapting to mediocrity. You start settling for comfort instead of growth. And what once felt like conviction slowly turns into apathy. It doesn't matter how good your intentions are if you never move. It doesn't matter how sincere your desires are if they never lead to action. The world is full of people with beautiful dreams that died in the waiting room of delay. People who talked about starting. People who made plans and promised themselves they would begin tomorrow. But tomorrow turned into next week, and next week turned into next year, and next year never came. Delay doesn't need your permission to kill your purpose. It just needs your silence. It just needs you to keep saying, "Not now," long enough until the fire goes out. You can't play games with time. You can't assume you'll have the same strength, the same conviction, the same opportunities later that you have now. Today's grace is for today's obedience, and if you waste it, you don't get to carry it forward. You lose it. You miss it. And yes, mercy can restore what was lost, but mercy doesn't erase the consequences of delay. There are doors that will close if you keep waiting. There are assignments that will be handed to others if you won't step forward. There are seasons you will miss if you don't move when you're called to move. Delay feeds pride. It tells you that you're in control, that you get to decide the pace of your growth, that you can manipulate the timing of your life. But you're not in control. You never were, and the sooner you humble yourself and act, the sooner you align with the rhythm of your calling. You don't get to demand signs and conditions when obedience is already clear. You don't get to rewrite the cost of your purpose just because comfort is easier. There is a narrow window for real transformation, and delay slams it shut. You were not created to live in limbo. You were not meant to float between decisions, waiting for certainty while forfeiting progress. You were made to move, to act, to build, to obey. And that begins not in some perfect future moment, but in the middle of your current mess, your current doubt, your current fear. That's where courage is born. That's where destiny takes root. Delay doesn't make things easier. It makes them heavier. It increases the weight of regret. It multiplies the pain of missed growth. It corrodes confidence and feeds shame. And once you've built a lifestyle around delay, it becomes incredibly difficult to trust yourself again. So stop pretending that delay is harmless. Stop excusing it as wisdom. Stop defending it with logic that masks fear. You're not protecting yourself. You're betraying yourself. You're not preserving your energy. You're draining your purpose. The longer you wait, the louder the voice of doubt becomes, and the quieter the voice of truth gets. You don't overcome delay with feelings. You overcome it with decision, with surrender, with discipline, with humility, with one small act of obedience that says, "I will no longer allow delay to define me." True change begins with obedience, not emotion or intention. Emotion may stir the heart. It may ignite the initial spark, but it cannot sustain the fire. Intention may make promises. It may sound noble and even feel purposeful, but it cannot carry the weight of transformation. Emotion fades, intention wavers, obedience remains. Obedience is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is a posture of the will, a disciplined alignment of your actions with truth, even when your feelings scream the opposite. Obedience is what separates the dreamers from the doers, the inspired from the transformed. It is the bridge between hearing what is right and living what is right. Without obedience, change remains a theory. Without obedience, growth stays locked behind the door of comfort. Without obedience, the gap between who you are and who you could be never closes. People often confuse inspiration with transformation. They hear a powerful message, they feel deeply moved, they write in their journal, they post a quote, and they think that something significant has happened. But nothing has happened until you obey. Nothing has changed until you act. The moment of conviction is not the moment of change. Conviction is only the invitation. Obedience is the response. Conviction without obedience becomes guilt. It becomes weight you carry, knowing what you should do but continuing not to do it. And the more you ignore conviction, the more calloused your heart becomes. Eventually, what once cut you deeply begins to feel normal. The voice that once stirred you begins to fade into background noise. Real change demands more than inspiration. It demands a willingness to submit your preferences, your comfort, your timing, your pride, and even your understanding to a higher truth. Obedience doesn't ask, "Do I feel like it?" Obedience asks, "Is it right?" It doesn't wait for the stars to align. It doesn't wait until the fear goes away. It acts in spite of fear, in spite of weakness, in spite of uncertainty. Obedience is raw. It's uncomfortable. It's often unseen and unrewarded in the short term. But it is the only path to lasting change. Emotion may initiate, intention may strategize, but only obedience moves the needle. You can have all the right information. You can have the best mentors, the clearest goals, the most beautifully written plans. But if you are not willing to obey when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when it costs you something, then none of it matters. Knowing what to do is not the same as doing it. Wanting to change is not the same as changing. The distance between knowing and becoming is obedience. The life you long for is not found in your feelings. It's found in your follow-through. Obedience is not glamorous. It often looks like small, thankless acts repeated over time. It looks like saying no when no one is watching. It looks like showing up when you're tired, when you feel unseen, when you feel like quitting. That's where real change begins. Not in the moment you feel inspired, but in the moment you choose to act on what you know is true. Many wait for motivation to obey. They wait for the right emotional state. They wait for a wave of energy, a moment of clarity, a strong push. But obedience doesn't wait for motivation. It creates momentum. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It teaches your heart to follow your will. The lie that you must feel it before you do, it is one of the greatest enemies of growth. Obedience trains your emotions. It disciplines your desires. It builds the kind of strength that inspiration cannot. And over time, as you continue to obey, your feelings begin to follow. But if you wait for your feelings to lead, you'll rarely move forward. Intention alone cannot carry the weight of transformation. You may intend to be better. You may intend to change your habits, to fix your mindset, to speak differently, to love more deeply, to pursue your calling. But intention without obedience is a mirage. It gives the illusion of progress while anchoring you to the same patterns. People spend years circling the same mountains, caught in cycles of desire without discipline. They talk about change, they pray about change, they plan for change, but they never obey the hard instructions that lead to change. The uncomfortable conversation, the painful confession, the cutting off of distractions, the early mornings, the self-denial. These are not inspired moments, these are obedient decisions. And they are what create real transformation. Obedience is the test of sincerity. It's easy to say you want to grow when growth is a concept. It's easy to commit when the cost is still theoretical. But obedience demands action before you're comfortable, before you're certain, before you're applauded. It demands that you step forward when your knees shake, that you take responsibility when it would be easier to blame, that you surrender control when everything in you wants to cling to it. Emotion doesn't do that. Intention doesn't do that. Only obedience can do that, and only obedience can change you at the core level, because it forces you to act against your lower instincts. It forces you to train your body, your thoughts, your reactions, to align with truth even when your flesh resists change that is not built on obedience is shallow. It doesn't last. It might look impressive for a moment. It might attract attention, but when pressure comes, when circumstances shift, when temptation arises, it crumbles. Because it was built on inspiration, not conviction. It was fueled by feeling, not fortified by faithfulness. Obedience is what roots you. It's what builds inner strength. It's what creates the kind of character that doesn't sway with every wind. It may not be flashy, but it's faithful. And faithfulness always bears fruit. Even if the harvest takes time, obedience teaches you to trust something greater than yourself. It requires humility. It requires you to admit that your feelings aren't always reliable, that your perspective is limited, that your comfort is not the highest priority. It trains you to walk in alignment with principles that lead to life, even when everything in you wants to compromise. It separates the emotional highs from actual transformation, and it produces the kind of change that doesn't just make you feel better, but makes you become better. Real transformation doesn't happen in a single moment of passion. It's forged in the fire of obedience, in the daily choices that no one sees, in the repeated steps taken when the path isn't glamorous. It's in the yes when it would be easier to say no. It's in the silence when gossip wants to speak. It's in the integrity when shortcuts tempt. It's in the work done when motivation has left the room. That is where change becomes real. That is where identity is shaped. That is where purpose is discovered. Not in your emotions, not in your intentions, but in your obedience. Taking the first step requires courage, not certainty. Most people wait for everything to line up before they move. They wait for a clear sign, a full plan, a safety net, a guarantee that things will work out. But life doesn't hand out blueprints. Destiny doesn't send a checklist, and waiting for certainty is the quickest way to remain stuck. The truth is, clarity often comes through movement, not before it. Understanding grows with action. The road becomes visible as you walk, but that initial step, that brave, trembling step into the unknown, requires something deeper than strategy. It requires courage. The kind of courage that rises not because the path is easy, but because the purpose is greater than the fear. You don't need to know everything to begin. You don't need to have every detail mapped out. You just need to be willing to trust that the first step is worth it, that movement matters more than perfection, that risk is part of the process. Courage is not about being fearless. Courage is choosing to move forward even when fear is loud. It is understanding that fear is not your master, and that uncertainty is not a reason to disqualify yourself from progress. There is no such thing as a perfect beginning. The longer you wait for one, the further you drift from the moment you were called to start. The first step is always the hardest because it forces you to leave what is known. It pushes you out of the comfort zone that, though unsatisfying, has become familiar. It requires you to confront your own doubts, your own limitations, your own excuses. Taking that step means facing the possibility of failure, of being misunderstood, of being judged, of discovering that the journey ahead is longer and harder than expected. But it also means opening the door to growth, to learning, to strength, to experiences that you could never access from the sidelines. Courage isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet resolve. Sometimes it looks like showing up again after being disappointed. Sometimes it looks like speaking truth when silence is safer. Sometimes it looks like pressing send, or walking into the room, or saying yes to something that scares you. These are the moments that shape your life. These are the steps that define your direction, and every time you take one, you build resilience, you build confidence. You teach your heart that you are not a prisoner to fear. There are countless people with incredible potential who never get past the starting line, not because they're incapable, not because they're unworthy, but because they let the need for certainty keep them paralyzed. They told themselves they'd begin when they were more ready